probably still think of as Worldcoin, is really serious about orbs. They are all in on orbs. But I'm not talking about the eyeball scanning ones. No, I'm talking about planets. Back in 2023, if you looked at Worldcoin's defining metrics page, it had a stat for the number of planets on which people had signed up for a WorldID. Very ambitious, Worldcoin. I like it. I like this idea of a multi-planet future. I like building that into your fundamental ideas, you know? I mean, as we know from my last episode of the podcast, I think it's going to be a better world when we have an interplanetary vision. So I support you in this metric, Worldcoin. And I wish you hadn't taken it off the site. You got to go look at Worldcoin's site through the Internet Archive to find it. But it is there. And I firmly believe that we should all lean forward into a post-contact future. And hey, Worldcoin is not the only decentralized project out there that was founded with an interplanetary vision. You know, the interplanetary file system, which is kind of like the update on BitTorrent that was brought to us by the folks at Filecoin and Protocol Labs and all that. They aren't joking when they call it interplanetary. You know, that is a real idea, and I am supportive of anyone who wants to think like that, who wants to think of crypto to the stars. Hello, and welcome to Diamond Rhino. This is the 4th episode. And once again, I am Brady Dale, the host of Diamond Rhino. I am also the author of the website Front Stage Exit, which hosts this podcast. And I'm the author of SBF, how the FTX bankruptcy unwound crypto's very bad good guy. If you want an account of the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried that goes all the way back to his first days in crypto in 2017, up through the moment that we realized that FTX was a house of cards, that's the book for you. And as for this podcast, each one of the episodes that has come out so far has had more listeners than the last. I don't know if they are completely new audiences for each one. Folks are just coming in because they like that topic, or if people are consistently listening. I have no way of knowing that yet. But the idea of this podcast, so you know what we're getting into here, is I'm trying to do a show where we follow one chain of thought on a topic, but where we bring in multiple people's perspectives on it. So a lot of times that will be the people who created whatever we're talking about. Like today, we're clearly talking about World and Worldcoin. But I want to help you digest a series of thoughts so you don't have to listen to 14 different podcasts to understand something. I listened to 14 different podcasts and I brought you the key chunks from it. So that's what the Diamond Rhino is all about. Most podcasts, especially in crypto, are just one interview on sort of one big topic, but they end up wandering through a lot of things, whereas this is meant to have an overarching thread to give you a sense. So that's where we're headed. And today, we are heading into the question of World and Worldcoin. One of the things I plan to consistently do on Diamond Rhino is take topics, mostly in the crypto space, that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with, and dive into them and try to steelman it as best I can. That's what we did with the very first episode here on XRP and Ripple. And that's what we're doing here again today, because Worldcoin, Sam Altman, all that stuff is just always kind of weirded me out. And so I decided I needed to go have a look. And this whole Worldcoin distinction, you know, as I've told you guys before, I cannot stand it when projects change their names. I just can't imagine that the gains from bringing in a new name is really worth it. And it just feels like a bald attempt to just get some silly headlines out of a thing. Like when WeWork, which was a good and reasonable name, became We. I don't know. The Worldcoin to World thing feels like the same to me, but whatever. I will probably call it Worldcoin more than I call it World on this show, because that's still how I think of it. You know, just like I'm never going to call Alphabet. It's always going to be Google to me. I feel like I've learned a lot about Worldcoin or World, and we're going to go through that today. And what we're going to really be assessing here is, you know, does the world need this? Does the world need World? That's our question. So it's a super well-funded project. It was launched by Sam Altman with others, a physicist and a philosopher, though the philosopher is gone now. And Sam Altman, is one of the best fundraisers in the world. He's, probably one of the most important founders on earth right now. And this is his side hustle. So, it's worth exploring. And the big question for me as I go through this, and I think you'll hear this tension throughout this whole conversation, is my irritation with World coming from a useful intuition about what this company is doing, or am I just lost in the sort of semiotic spiral that so many people get lost in when something just has a weird look to it? The joke that I've always liked to make about Worldcoin is the problem with Worldcoin is the optics. But let's go through it. Let's go through it in more detail, and you can see what I found. Because I know at this point, if you are reading Front Stage Exit and you're listening to Diamond Rhino, probably you are inside the crypto bubble. You are not a grandma trying to decide if she wants to buy some Bitcoin. So I have no doubt, have heard about Worldcoin and its eyeball scanning orb. You know about the orb. You've come to whatever opinion you're going to come to about the orb. So we're not going to really talk about it like all that much. It's not going to be a big focus because I'm probably not going to change your mind. No, we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about your love life. So, if you watch the typical Worldcoin podcast, say Sam Altman's on somewhere, or more often it's the CEO, what the typical conversation goes like is just like, what is the idea of World? What is your latest focus these days? Like, why are you doing this? And then let's talk a whole lot about iris scanning, the way that they identify people individually and how weird that looks, and talk about the orb and what did it cost to make the orb. And then it always ends up on privacy. Where does that data go? And that data being the scan of your eyeball. What happens to it? This is 90% of the conversation. And in the early days, sometimes we would talk about some of the places where Worldcoin had some tension with local authorities where it was seeking to do scanning. There was some tension in one of the Central African nations, and I think Spain banned it, and Germany was very iffy about it. So that kind of comes up sometime. And another big story that comes up about Worldcoin a lot when folks want to kind of push back on it is in its very earliest days, as it was just launching and it was getting its first 500,000 people signed up to Worldcoin, some people were overzealous or maybe even somewhat misleading with folks about what they promised as they offered them a Worldcoin sign up. The MIT Tech Review did a big story in 2022 about some ways in which people felt manipulated or taken advantage of as those early folks out there were getting people to sign up. And I've got some experience with this. I used to be a nonprofit activist. I worked for a number of organizations, most notably Clean Water Action and Acorn, that put a lot of effort into putting people out on the streets and getting them to do things. A big one was voter registration. Particularly we were doing voter registration, especially when we were getting people to do stuff that didn't cost any money to the people who they were going up to and approaching, whether it was door to door or on the street. And you would always, whenever you're doing a big grassroots push like that, you always get people who optimize for numbers over doing it the right way, because they just, they want to hit their quota. They want to get a bonus from getting more in. And so I'm not too surprised that there was a certain amount of at least some people who were manipulative on the ground because they just want to hit those numbers. That kind of thing, that kind of always happens. But it's not ideal. It sounds like we're not hearing as many stories like that anymore now that it's, a little further along. They're up into the multiple millions of people signed up, but we should all stay tuned and be attentive of those kinds of things. But the one point that is worth making, and I think I might have even made this mistake when I wrote about Worldcoin very orthogonally earlier this week in one of my posts that included a Worldcoin app, Divine Research. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Worldcoin scans your irises, not your retinas. So your irises are the area, the colored part in the middle of your eye, but that when people say you've got blue eyes or brown eyes, the part that they're talking about, that's your iris. So that's what they scan, because there's lots of nuance in there. There's much more nuance in there than there is on your face or there is on in your fingerprint or whatever. So the history of WorldCoin, sort of where it all began, the story that's told, is that Sam Altman was afraid about the way that artificial intelligence was going to put so many people out of work. And so he wanted to create some sort of mechanism to deliver a universal basic income to people around the world. And this kind of squares with a United Nations development goal, as Coin Bureau pointed out in a video that they did about WorldCoin a couple of years ago. But then over time, as WorldCoin was looking to do a better job of justifying itself, they started to realize that as AI got better and better, more and more people were using it to manipulate other people on the internet. And so the mission of WorldCoin seemed to kind of pivot, or if not exactly a pivot, at least to refocus within its universe of possible aims. And it focused more on deepfakes at that time, about sort of authenticating people on the internet. And Coin Bureau also talked about that.
The Worldcoin Foundation's website also specifies that its purpose includes, quote, helping achieve certain targets of UN Sustainable Development Goal 16. Now, for context, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are the origin of all the dystopian technologies being pushed on the population, including digital ID, CBDCs, and smart cities.
But then, as Coin Bureau pointed out, eventually this kind of moves. Like they have this vantage point of Sam Altman running OpenAI, and he has the insight that AI is going to change the internet as we know it. And so the value of the WorldID is now less about this distributing money, though I suppose that's still there, but the more immediate concern of the fact that no one knows what's real online anymore.
And this relates to our fourth concern, and that's that WorldCoin's mission seems to have shifted over time. When it began, it was all about UBI. Now it seems to have shifted its focus to fighting deepfakes and the like. More circumstantial evidence to the idea that it was never about the crypto and all about the hardware.
So Alex Blania appeared on the Empire podcast and sort of revisited this topic of deepfakes, but he actually came at it at a different direction, as if it wasn't really about like solving this problem, but more opening up the opportunity that an internet where you can actually know who is actually a person and have maybe some history or record about the person, or sort of verify certain things about the person, how that could actually be an unlock that makes the internet much more valuable.
We started working on this idea to launch a token by giving ownership in it to every human being, just for being a human. And one of the big necessities that you truly have to solve to get there is proving unique humanness on the internet, because nothing right now really works globally. So it's just very foundational to your online identity that you are a human being.
And since then, since they began to talk about WorldCoin in this way, about this like human verification side and the problem of deepfakes, the company has refined their mission somewhat more. And at the big WorldCoin conference about a year and a half ago, Blania came on stage with Sam Altman, and he talked about refining the vision into sort of three specific verticals, as not the permanent verticals, but sort of the next area in which they expect to see the biggest amount of growth.
But WorldID is really what makes that useful. WorldID is what big platforms can integrate, and what you will be able to actually use on these platforms to verify your humanity. And since the beginning of thinking about this product, we always believed that there's three main areas where this is going to matter in the beginning the most. It was gaming, dating, and social.
And so at this point, World has said a bit about the dating thing and the gaming thing, but not so much about the social thing. But this is what I meant when I said that we were here to talk about your love life, because World is dead serious. They want to collaborate with people like the Match Group, which has, Tinder and Match.com and lots of the big dating sites that folks use, in order to help people know that they're really talking to a person, and they're talking to someone who, at least in some way, bears a resemblance to what their dating profile says about them. Adrian Ludwig is the Chief Information Security Officer at WorldCoin, or at World, and he appeared on the Be in Crypto podcast just before Christmas last year, talking about some of these crucial issues.
We think that the way that networks will be valuable to the users of those networks is if they can trust them. And so that's why we started working on what we call proof of human, so that when you're doing online dating, you can know that it's a verified human. You can have more confidence in the way they represent themselves in their profile, around what age they are, potentially what their face looks like.
It doesn't seem like they have got a social network that's willing to work with them quite yet. We here in the crypto world, we know of an example of a social network that tried to prove people were human. That was voice.com out of Block One, which is associated with the EOS blockchain. That didn't work out at all. I can see a lot of social networks being extremely wary about creating friction for their users around verifying their identity. So I'm not surprised that one isn't really taking off super fast. But to zoom out here, this concept of digital identity has been a hot topic and in crypto and in the world for a long time now. Like, as long as I've been covering this space, there's been people who are talking about digital identity and why it's so important. Like, one of the first big ICOs I ever focused on was Civic, which was an identity ICO. And when I was at South by Southwest in 2019, I verified my identity with the Civic app and was able to buy a beer out of a vending machine because I was able to show that I was over 21 years old. But it's actually a much bigger topic than that. A woman named Dakota Gruner, who spoke at TEDx Marrakesh talking about the scale of the problem globally with folks who just don't have any kind of identity.
For more than 1 billion people, this is their situation every day. Let me repeat that. 1 billion of our fellow global citizens are unable to prove their identity because they lack any recognized ID. That's 1/7 of the world's population. That means that 1 in 7 people have no way of proving who they are outside of their local communities. In effect, they are invisible. Now, the ability to prove who you are with certainty and in a manner that's recognized and trusted by institutions and by governments is a fundamental prerequisite to accessing even the most basic services. If you can't prove who you are, you have limited access to healthcare, to education, to other social programs. Your ability to move across borders, to vote, to enroll in school, to access a bank account is limited or non-existent.
It's amazing that we have the internet. We can talk to space, but there's still folks out there who can't prove who they are, throughout the world. And even to the degree that some people can, there's a lot of problems and gaps and bugs in the way that we do identity. One place it's worth noting, if you know anything about Worldcoin, what you know is that you scan irises, and that verifies the person just has one instance on the Worldcoin network. And whatever you think about that, it's worth knowing this isn't entirely unprecedented in the world. India has actually gone ham on this kind of identity. They have this system called Aadhaar that has been going for several years now and doesn't just use retina scans, but it also uses face scans and fingerprints in order to have sort of multimodal identity definition so that people can really prove who they are throughout one of the world's most populous countries. The World Bank talks about how great that is in one of their videos. Obviously, for a lot of us in crypto, organizations like the World Bank are not ones that we feel super excited about hearing from, but they do provide a useful perspective on sort of what at least the aims were here.
Indians have to show identification to draw rations of grain or to secure subsidies for natural gas.
Over the last 15 years, India had built a social welfare state with a lot of entitlements and benefits: food security, pensions, scholarships, employment guarantees. And it needed a good, robust way of identifying individuals to make sure that these benefits went to the right people and there was no loss or leakage.
The World Bank estimates that reducing fraud and improving efficiency could save India more than $11 billion per year.
And I also found it encouraging that I found this YouTube, a pretty big YouTuber named BiteMonk, who digs deep on all kinds of technical systems. And he did a deep dive into the Aadhaar system in India. And at the end of it, sort of talked about how it worked and like what its various facets are and how complex it is. And at the end of it, he did a comparison of Aadhaar to the US, to China, and Europe. And he came to a pretty positive conclusion about what they're doing in India.
Aadhaar clearly stands out globally for its advanced design and inclusivity. By using multimodal biometrics like fingerprints, iris scans, and facial recognition, it ensures unmatched accuracy. Its API-driven architecture seamlessly integrates with public and private services, powering everything from banking to government welfare. Most importantly, Aadhaar is built for inclusion, making identity verification accessible even in remote areas, bridging the gap for millions. India's Aadhaar biometric system is a shining example of how technology can transform lives at scale. While there are challenges, its benefits far outweigh the limitations.
This is something that obviously World is very excited about, looking at the example of India and saying that they have the opportunity to bring something similar to the entire rest of the world. They think it's a gigantic unlock, and they think it's a very bold business case for them. And so obviously Alex Blania of Worldcoin is very bullish on it, which is sort of perspective he gave on the Empire podcast.
And then the other big thing, as you mentioned, is proving humanness on the internet is going to become this major topic, and it's going to be really, really tricky.
And look, this isn't just about the developing world. It's not accurate to say that we can rest on our laurels here in the United States because we have a just fine identity system. The truth is, people get their identity stolen in America all the time. We lose billions of dollars to identity theft per year here, and it is worth us having a real conversation about if we might not want to make life a little bit harder for identity thieves. And it's not just a problem for about your bank account or you're paying your bills or things like that. It gets a little more heartbreaking than that. The truth is, romance scams are a giant deal. The FTC estimated that $1 billion is lost every year, more than $1 billion, to romance scams. And that's just lonely people online who get convinced that someone who sort of looks plausibly good looking is somewhat interested in them, and they get hustled into giving that person money. The average is $2,000 per person, which is, real money for some low income people. And the typical hustle is, it's usually women who get busted this way, lonely middle-aged women, perhaps widowers or divorcees. And there's all these people who find these images of sort of decently good looking but not intimidating middle-aged guys who somewhere in their photo makes them look like they're decent human beings. And they start emailing with them and trick them into giving them money. So it goes to show you that ID and love is a problem. And another thing Blania is pretty good on is the fact that in a world with more and more advanced artificial intelligence, the way that we've done identity so far is just going to be completely gameable and totally wrecked by AI.
In a world where neither digital content, meaning video or images, nor intelligence, so like CAPTCHAs or more complicated actions, are discriminator anymore, what it means to be a human being on the internet, the only thing that you're left with really is to bridge to the real world and kind of measure what it means to be a human being.
So here's where we're at. Identity on the internet is a mess. And on some level, we've always liked that. For a long time, we had a lot of fun with the fact that on the internet, no one needs to know you're a dog. But is it time for us to enable the internet to know whether or not you're a dog? Is it time to give up on some of that fun? Might it be worth it? So like I said, Worldcoin World was not created solely with this identity problem in mind. There were other things about it too. And a big part of it is just how badly artificial intelligence is going to change the future. I use artificial intelligence literally every day as I'm making stuff for Front Stage Exit. I don't have it write things for me, don't worry. In particular, I have it do copy editing for me. It's tremendous for that. It's also tremendous for finding sources to look at, things that Google would never surface. I find it enormously helpful, but it does begin to make you realize that the place for the guy who scours the internet for information out there and puts explainers together for people, it might not last that long. It makes you nervous. And on the Lex Fridman podcast, which is, big popular interview show that talks to a lot of tech people, if you're not familiar with it, Sam Altman appeared a couple of times. And on his first appearance, he said that, and this is from the guy who was creating the best known artificial intelligence system out there, ChatGPT. He told Lex that if you're not a little bit scared about AI, you've got your head in the sand and you're kind of crazy. And that's a part of why he was motivated, he explains to Lex, to launch Worldcoin as a side project.
I think we as a society are confused about whether we want to work more or work less. And certainly about whether most people like their jobs and get value out of their jobs or not. Some people do. I love my job. I suspect you do too. that's a real privilege. Not everybody gets to say that. And I think we are going to find incredible new jobs, and society as a whole and people as individuals are going to get much, much richer. But as a cushion through a dramatic transition, and as just like the world should eliminate poverty if able to do so, I think it's a great thing to do as a small part of the bucket of solutions. I helped start a project called Worldcoin, which is a technological solution to this. We also have funded a large, I think maybe the largest and most comprehensive universal basic income study as part of, sponsored by OpenAI. And I think it's like an area we should just be looking into.
And it's not clear yet kind of how Worldcoin plans to distribute this universal basic income, or if it is really the main point of the project any longer. And it's not clear that Worldcoin is going to do any sort of ongoing emissions as a way of doing UBI. It actually seems like Altman maybe has this idea that eventually AI becomes so profitable that it can just spin off some of its astounding profits and wealth it's generating to distribute some assets to people, and perhaps that comes in the form of it buying World and then sending World around to people, or it buying stablecoins and them around. Who knows? We just don't know that yet. But what we do know is that World has, at least so far, left its tokenomics up to the possibility that one day it may not have a fixed supply. So that's something Coin Bureau talked about.
Now, WLD's tokenomics have been infamously difficult to find, despite being clearly noted on the Worldcoin website. That's because the tokenomics section of the white paper is blocked in so many countries that even crypto news company CoinDesk had a hard time accessing it. We managed to get access to this info by using a VPN set to Puerto Rico, in case anyone's wondering. Now, WLD is an ERC20 token on both Ethereum and Optimism. It has an initial supply of 10 billion, which is intended to correspond to 1 WLD per person, 7.5 billion people, plus 2.5 billion WLD for Worldcoin and the project's early investors. The tokenomics notes this supply could change in the future. For now, WLD has no inflation.
Can they do this? Is it possible? Is it even something they're still looking at? That's all very unclear, and I imagine it's unclear even within World, the company. But if there is one thing that is clear about World, Sam Altman is not running it on a day-to-day basis, but it fundamentally functions with the DNA of how he approaches things, and how Sam Altman approaches things is going big or going home. And that was something he was very clear about at that Worldcoin conference.
Not always, but surprisingly often, I have found that scale is this very important emergent property across all sorts of things. You want to scale neural networks, you want to scale like companies, you want to scale crypto networks, you want to scale all sorts of things. And human intuition, for whatever reason, seems to consistently undervalue the emergent properties of scale across all of these things. So one joke that I use sometimes is, when in doubt, scale it up. It doesn't work for everything, but I think it's an interesting default. And one of the things that we've talked about with Worldcoin is we want to see what happens when we do this at mass scale. If we're going to build infrastructure for all people, it's great that we've signed up so many, but there's like 99.9% left to go. But scale has a really important quality across all of these things, and it has been a principle that we've been driving towards.
And when you hear Altman talk about that, it kind of makes sense that once upon a time, they used to list the number of planets they'd reached on their website. So I kind of joked earlier that the problem with Worldcoin is the optics, and I do think that's its biggest problem it has. I think the fact that they made this weird orb and they're running around shoving the orbs in people's faces just has a natural ick factor for most people. I do actually think that has been one of the company's biggest problems, and also this problem of like, who should we trust with identity? What's the right way to go around about solving this identity problem? Do we even need to solve the identity problem? Maybe it would be better if we just all didn't worry about identity so much. Maybe we don't need to KYC everyone constantly everywhere. This is very much an open question for the planet right now. One fun fact I want to point out here, and this is just an aside, but it's something I discovered as Worldcoin was launching. Worldcoin or World now, wasn't actually the first cryptocurrency to call itself WorldCoin. In fact, there is a very old cryptocurrency, a cryptocurrency that's been around longer than Ethereum, that already had the name WorldCoin. And it's just a little proof of work chain that never amounted to much. But they were really mad about the launch of WorldCoin. And I will include a link in my show notes to a story I did for The Defiant to show about how irritated they were that their name got stolen. On this whole question of the optics of WorldCoin and this weirdness of people scanning your retinas and generating some sort of string that identifies you out of that, and so they know that you are a unique person in their system. I am deeply ambivalent about this question. You know, the thing that people always ask is, does WorldCoin store the retina scans or not? And what it says again and again and again is that no, they don't store photos of your retina or data about your retina. They use zero-knowledge proofs to make some kind of hash that allows them to know that this retina has been seen, and it is sufficient that the orb can compare it with the database and say, we have seen this retina before, without actually having an image of the retina. Whatever. I care about privacy a lot. I worry about privacy a lot. I use a VPN as much as I can. Sites won't work more and more often without them. I have 10 million different passwords. I don't know all my passwords. I use multi-factor authentication as much as I possibly can. I try to give Facebook as little visibility into my life as I possibly can, though I have it going way back before I knew to think about these things. So it's like no point in getting rid of it now. But I am constantly trying to limit my visibility surface area, these different sorts of companies. And I've, when I think about who the real privacy terror is in the world, I think about Google. There's this short story that I've wanted to write for a really long time, the crux of which is basically just this lobbyist who's going around Washington, D.C., who has some very specific sets of requests that he's making to different decision makers. And he goes and meets with them one-on-one. And when they start showing hesitancy about whatever it is he wants to do, he hands them these manila folders. And the folders have a bunch of physical copies of records of things the person he's talking to, the senator, the regulator, the member of the House, the cabinet secretary, of embarrassing and compromising things that they have searched for and looked at online, and just how much they've looked and how much they've surfaced them, because Google knows all that stuff. They know the weird thing you looked for in the middle of the night, and they know how long you stayed on the website looking at it. It's terrifying. So when I think about the fact that companies like Google have visibility into all the weird stuff that I've looked into, yeah, I just don't really care about some company having a photo of my retina. There's a lot of ridiculous photos of me online. But I wonder, a thing that we see again and again is that people in this modern day of age, when individuals feel pretty powerless, these symbolic fights, I think, often feel more tractable to them. So, we can't ever stop Google or Facebook. That seems hopeless at this point. They are dynasties now. But we can scapegoat WorldCoin. There was an interesting essay that came out on the internet this week called it was the Panopticon essay. I'll link it in the show notes. It's by an ex-user named Molly Cantillion. And the point of it is how she's using artificial intelligence to just sort of pull her whole life together and optimize everything. Her argument here is there's always been these companies who knew everything about us, but we didn't really have any visibility into their analysis of us. But with AI, we can start harvesting our own data and actually have a panopticon of one that's somewhat useful, which it's kind of like how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb kind of vibes. But maybe there's something to it, like maybe there is something on the other side of there just being so much data accumulated. But I guess I feel like WorldCoin with its orb and its eyeball scanning sits at like the perfect nexus of this ambivalence. But there is a deeper other side. Cryptocurrency arose from the movement that we know as the cypherpunks. So these were a bunch of technical people who loved the internet, loved technology, but could see very early that identity and data was going to be something that could become a force of control on people, and they wanted to resist that in some way. Harry Halpin, longtime cypherpunk, a fixture in crypto world, he spoke about this in a great speech at an Ethereum Foundation event recently, and he spoke about some of the frustrations folks have, especially cypherpunks, as they look at new modes of identity arising on the internet and what that could potentially mean.
There are two paths of technology, as I think Amir Takia said, looking at Lewis Mumford. And one path, we have this centralization of mega machinic technology, which sucks power away from the individual into centralized power structures, making us all slaves to the machine. And I think in the worst possible world, blockchain technology would make this worse, that we would be completely enslaved in some sort of libertarian nightmare where our movements and everything we do and our transactions are transparent to everyone and recorded. But the cypherpunk saying is transparency for the powerful, privacy for the weak. So we should have not identities, not soul-bound tokens, not complete nonsense like DIDs or various authoritarian technology claiming to be self-sovereign like this self-sovereign identity nonsense, but we should instead support zero-knowledge proofs and anonymous credentials that enable selective disclosure.
However, when you look at the argument that Halpin gives here, what he's basically saying is we have the technology to allow people to have identities and to disclose less. The canonical example here, right, is that when you go to a bar and you've got to prove that you're over 21, you hand them your ID, right? And we all know that if you're over 21 and you do this, 99 times out of 100, the bartender barely glances at it. They just look for that number on your birth date and verify that it's long enough ago. And they're like, good to go. What kind of shot do you want? But you are handing over a lot of data about yourself. You're telling them potentially where you live, if your address is still accurate on there. You're telling them what your height is and what your weight is. You're giving a lot to them in that moment when all you need to disclose is the fact that you were born more than 21 years ago. They don't even need to know your specific age. They just need to know it's more than 21 years ago. And there are ways to do this with cryptography. It's, zero knowledge proofs is the shorthand for it. But one thing that's encouraging, and again, we just have to kind of trust WorldCoin on this, or World on this, but they are thinking about these things. And Adrian Ludwig, their information security guy, is honestly pretty good on the ways in which they are trying to make the data that's accumulating about you out there something that you have more ability to manage and an ability to disclose in a limited way. First of all, he points out that the way WorldCoin manages even the data that identifies you as a person on their network, that's already broken up across a bunch of partners. And so no one person even has a complete picture of that little ID that they have of you.
By November of this year, we expect that all of the data that is behind WorldID will be held by those parties, broken into pieces in such a way that no one of them is able to tell anything about that data other than answering the question, is this unique? The core to our uniqueness service.
But then also he's pretty good on explaining that in the future, you should be able to disclose things to different businesses, different government organizations, just as much information as you need. Prove that you live in this town, prove that you're a citizen of the country. In such a way, he argues that a disclosure to one entity would not be easily linkable as a disclosure to another entity. And he speaks this pretty well.
The way the WorldID works, you have this unique identity, and then we use what are called zero knowledge proofs whenever you're interacting with any application. So when you go to your healthcare provider, the proof of your identity is separate and not able to be linked to the proof that you might use for your bank or for your job or for, in our case, for your game or for your social network or for your dating network. So those are all able to be kept separate. And in fact, they're so separate that the underlying verification process also can't be connected.
That is not the way things are now. I mean, just on the simplest level, if you are interacting with sites on the internet, probably you give all of them the same email or one of 2 or 3 different emails that you use. And that data point alone is enough to connect you across lots and lots of different sites. And that's what data brokers are doing all the time. They're taking all those different logins and figuring out how you are and creating profiles of you across those logins in order for marketers to market to you in a more targeted fashion. So it's nice to hear that Worldcoin is envisioning a future in which we can have more limited disclosures and actually take real use of cryptography to have more control over what we tell people. The real impetus is not on companies like World, which are making the system to allow for these limited disclosures, but the people that need to be pressured are the companies that are asking you to disclose things, because you'll find time and time again, they are asking for more than they really need to. And it's up to us, it's incumbent on us as consumers to be like, look, there are other options out there that you should be using, and we would like you more if you did use that. So where are you at this point? Do you love Worldcoin? And perhaps more importantly, are you ready to let Worldcoin come in and help you out, make sure you don't get screwed over as you try to fall in love? Because, as Alex Blania said, dating is one of its first real verticals. And look, I don't want to make light about this either. One of the biggest stories in the last year has been the rings of pig butchering gangs screwing innocent, lonely, kind of sad Americans with not particularly interesting lives, but a couple grand in their bank account. And it would be nice to have a way that we could teach them to ask people to prove whether or not they're real people and whether or not they are the people that they say they are. It's bleak. And, when I think about the misery people have out there in the world of online dating, it's so bad. Everyone just needs to stop and go to the bars again. But for real, on some level, that whole use case made me think well, if not World, something? So the big question for me about Worldcoin, I don't really care about the retina thing. I do care about this massive panopticon that is the internet. Is Worldcoin the right way to do this? Is one big system the way? Is there some way to do digital identity that's more of a mesh across multiple entities, that's more decentralized? Is there a way to prove personhood across some more broken up regime? Is Worldcoin the one big system because they're the only ones who are actually trying hard enough on this right now? I can tell in my looking into this that Worldcoin is building some of the right kinds of things. The question is whether or not there will actually be a business case around those applications. On the other hand, a real concern to have about Worldcoin is that it is building a list of people. And that alone is kind of scary. In Dakota Gruner's talk that she gave at that TEDx Marrakesh, one of the things she pointed out is once governments have lists of people and legibility into their systems, that's a way in which the worst governments are able to really abuse their citizenry.
The most egregious risks range from discrimination and denial of due process rights to the facilitation of ethnic cleansing and genocide. It must never be forgotten that any time personal information is collected, there's a risk of misuse and of abuse. It is facilitating the marginalization of China's ethnic minorities today, and it's been happening since the dawn of digital technologies.
But it's hard to imagine a state without lists. As an aside here, I'm not going to cite many of the critics of Worldcoin here. I feel like I've laid out the criticisms pretty well myself. And honestly, as I dug through kind of the most critical posts about them, it was all pretty silly and shrill. I checked the Crypto Critics Corner podcast and the Tech Won't Save Us podcast as 2 examples. And they just sort of defaulted to the kind of classic NPR liberal hand-wringing that you've heard a million times before. And we're not particularly illuminating other than just sort of speculating about a dystopian future. So I'm leaving it. Another area that I didn't dig into much here is the various applications on Worldcoin. That wasn't really the point today. Worldcoin is far enough along that people are building real mini apps on it and they're doing things. I don't have a great sense of how big the scale is on that. But one thing I will say is a story I wrote earlier this week which was about uncollateralized lending. I talked about Divine Research on there, and Divine Research will give a very small loan to you. I think the equivalent of like $5. And if you pay that back, you'll get a larger loan. And if you pay that back, you'll get a larger loan, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a way to approach lending to people who don't have collateral to put up and to kind of get them started. Divine Research actually has a pretty cool dashboard up. I wasn't able to find that when I was doing my story before, but you can see that this is at least one app on Worldcoin that seems to be kind of cooking. They've had almost 800,000 unique borrowers so far. They've issued over 1 million loans so far. They've lent out more than $3 million in crypto. They've had more than 2 million paid back. They've earned $330,000 in all those loans. So, it is a real application. People are actually using this system, but it was out of scope to go much more deeply into the actual use of World so far. It's still early. And for those of you out there who are highly skeptical about the approach World is taking, listen, I'm not going to fight with you. I get it. It's a vibe, right? One counter argument that I would give on a purely sort of selfish, bullish level to keep in mind is we are building a future of blockchains in which we effectively have nations online. I think more and more as we go forward, we will start to see blockchains as something like nations. The thing about it, though, as you have all these different nations go up on the internet, there is no geography. Every single one of these nations is as close to each other as they are to any of the rest. It's just a bridge hop away every time. And so if there is a company that is out there aggressively building a use case for some kind of crypto network and getting lots of people to come on board, that's lots of people who are now on the decentralized internet that could just easily hop over to your better chain really quickly, as long as you make the case that it is the more ethical and user aligned space to exist in. So I don't know, don't be too sad if this company is really trying to get multiple billions of people using a cryptocurrency, because that is multiple billions of people who could easily hop over to the world that you think is the better one. So, Worldcoin. It still does kind of squick me out, but I'm not sure that's anything more than our natural human tendency to scapegoat things, especially new things, especially things that we find weird. The progressives of the world will not stop scapegoating Bitcoin, and the cypherpunk in me probably kind of can't help but scapegoat Worldcoin a little bit. But the truth is, the digital panopticon was built before anyone even had the idea for World or Worldcoin. It is a giant looming over all of us. 1 foot of that giant is standing in Mountain View, California, and the other foot of that giant is standing in Menlo Park, California. And that is the digital panopticon that you should really worry about. Who has pictures of our retinas? I don't know, man. I care more about the company that have access to the weird photos we took of ourselves naked when we were drunk and sent to someone that we were hot for. That is, to me, the more embarrassing and disconcerting photo, and we've all got some of those out there, right? So, which one are you really scared of? I'm scared about the people who know what I searched for in the dead of night when I was sad and feeling lonely. I'm a guy with brown eyes, brown hair, and glasses. That's already a little bit embarrassing, but not as embarrassing as all those things I've looked into those many nights online before I really understood what it meant to be online. The fear I have about World and Worldcoin, it might be misplaced, and anyway, World is at least talking the right talk. How they walk remains to be seen. So, thank you for being here for this 4th episode of Diamond Rhino. I'm glad to do it. I'm sorry if I didn't tie it up in a super neat bow for you. I hope folks are liking this podcast. Like I said, I don't know if this is something that people come back to or if each individual one just sort of attracts its own listener base based on the topic and they don't return. If you are returning, I'm ecstatic to have you. Obviously, I am new to this format. I haven't really been a podcaster before, and I'm trying to do this in a way that's a little bit different than what most other podcasts in the space are. So I'm figuring out the format myself. I hopefully am getting better at it. I would love to hear what you thought about the episode and what I've discussed here, whether that's an email to me or if that's a comment over on the page for the episode on frontstageexit.com, whatever way you want to do it, a tweet, all of that would be great. Tell me that I'm wrong and I'm crazy and that I completely missed this and that WorldCoin is fundamentally evil and that's just so clear. Happy to hear it. Tell me how much you like all the quotes I put in here. Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it boring? I have some ideas about some other ways to shake up the format here that I will try once I get fully adept at the technical side of doing it the way I'm doing it. But we're still working here, but I'd love to get feedback. There will be lots and lots of links in the show notes for this show. Also, I have updated the links about the aliens episode that I put out last Sunday. There's a bunch of things that I realized later that I hadn't put into the show notes. So if you really want to dive deep on that topic or this topic, there's always lots of links in the show notes, including a lot of the YouTube videos that I pulled many of these quotes from. So go have a look at that. And we'll be back next Sunday. But in the meantime, remember, it's a beautiful world out there, but encrypt your files.
The new Lamborghini, yeah. The new Lamborghini, come on now. Lamborghini, yeah. Lamborghini, ooh. Lamborghini, whoa. Lamborghini. There's only one way it goes, There's only one way it shows, yeah. Like a rocket to the moon, like a falcon in the sky. She goes up, 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 woo. Bitcoin's going up, come sing it, yeah. Bitcoin's going up. My Bitcoin's going up, sing it, yeah. Bitcoin's going up, up. My Bitcoin's going up, up. I swear every time I check the price, see that Bitcoin's going up, up. Yeah, every time I check the price, my Bitcoin's going up. My Bitcoin's going up, Bitcoin's going up. Every time I check the price, I say my Bitcoin's going up. Every time I check the price, I say Bitcoin's going. Well, every time I check the price, Bitcoin's going up. Every time I check the price, my Bitcoin's